Sir Aldrich had once stood on these same walls under a clear blue sky, watching children race in the courtyard below, while merchants argued over grain prices and kitchen smoke rose in lazy, harmless curls from the castle chimneys. That memory flashes in his mind for a single heartbeat, bright and almost gentle, before the present tears it apart as if it were a lie. Now the sky over Valgren is not blue but a choking mass of gray, loaded with smoke and ash, and the courtyard that had echoed with laughter is a boiling chaos of screams, pounding boots, and the raw stench of sweat, fear, and spilled entrails. He jams his sword between two loose stones of the crenellation just to keep himself from dropping when another impact shakes the wall beneath his feet, his fingers numbed by the vibration that runs up through the hilt and into his bones, and he tastes dust and iron on his tongue as he forces himself to look down at the killing ground beyond the ditch. Where once he had watched carts rolling peacefully across green fields, there is only a carpet of broken bodies, shattered shields, and snapped spears, and above it all, a sea of enemy weapons glints dully through the smoke as men roar and die, the sound rising in uneven waves that batter against the stone as relentlessly as the siege engines. He has endured more sieges than he cares to count, has watched winter starve enemies off the walls, and has ridden out under banners drenched in victory and filth, but nothing in all those years prepares him for the sight that freezes his breath halfway out of his lungs. Amid the crush of bodies and weapons, a cluster of men pushes forward with a strange cohesion, protecting something at their center, and as they clear a path through the chaos, a flagpole rises, swaying once before finding its balance in a calloused fist. The cloth snaps in the wind, catching a ragged shaft of light that cuts through the smoke, and Aldrich feels the world tilt under his boots. The colors are the same deep red and muted gold he has worn on his surcoat for 3 decades. The sigil is the same rampant hound he swore to honor when he knelt as a young man in this very courtyard. It is his own coat of arms flying against his walls, his own symbol leading the charge toward the gates, and for a moment the battlefield blurs as if his eyes were filled with water, though he knows they are not, because water is a kindness the day has long since spent. Before we dive deeper into this siege and Aldrich's downfall, tell me in the comments from where you were watching this, and then get ready because things are about to get even darker. Enjoy the story. The roar of a trebuchet drowns even the screaming for a heartbeat, a low, monstrous groan of wood and rope that Aldrich feels as much in his ribs as in his ears. And then the air above him is ripped apart by the passage of a stone the size of a horse's torso. It whistles over the rampart, close enough that the wind it drags behind slaps at his face and slams into the wall 20 paces to his left, tearing out a chunk of masonry and an explosion of rock splinters and dust. 2 archers vanish in that instant, one flung into empty space with a scream that cuts off mid-air, the other crushed beneath the collapsing parapet, and a sickening crunch that Aldrich hears even through the thunder of impact. Pebbles and fragments rain over him, ringing off his helmet, stinging his cheeks, and for a second he has to brace both hands on the stones to keep from sliding in the slurry of blood and mud under his boots, the battlefield stink of smoke, shit, and hot metal pressing into his sinuses like a physical hand. Behind him, inside the walls, Valgren is unrecognizable. The orderly courtyard where squires once drilled with blunted swords is now a grid of barricades made from overturned wagons and broken tables, buckets of water shoved into every corner, barrels split open to form makeshift cover. Children cling to their mothers' skirts near the wells, their faces streaked with soot and tears, while old men mutter fragmented prayers, fingers digging into rosary beads as if they could anchor the castle to the hill with nothing more than faith and habit. Women run back and forth with sloshing pails, their skirts darkened with water and grime, their hands red from hauling stones and bandages, the air full of the overlapping noises of shouted orders, distant sobbing, and the crackle of flames licking somewhere out of sight. The ground beneath Aldrich's greaves is no longer solid earth, but a slick paste where trampled dirt mixes with spilled water and blood, spreading in dark ribbons that cling to leather and iron alike, and fill the air with a sour, metallic dampness that seems to soak straight through armor and skin. For years, every time a fresh-faced recruit had asked him what it meant to be a knight, Aldrich had answered without hesitation, the phrase worn smooth from repetition: "Honor is obedience without question." He used to believe it, used to feel something almost like pride when he said it, as if the words were armor around his bout. Now, with the flag bearing his own sigil waving above the enemy ranks and turning his stomach to stone, the motto sounds in his head like a drunk's joke told in a tavern after too much cheap wine, an ugly line everyone laughs at until they realize it is about them. He drags his gaze away from the impossible banner, forcing himself back into the present, where men look to him for orders, and grips the edge of the wall until his gauntlets creak, trying to push down the rising nausea that has nothing to do with the stink of burning flesh. He can feel his heart hammering against the mail pressed to his chest, too fast and too loud, making him painfully aware of his own age, of the stiffness in his shoulders, of the way his knees ache when he shifts his weight to bark commands.
"Keep them away from the gatehouse," he shouts to the men clustered along the battlements, his voice scraping out of a throat raw from smoke and giving orders. Arrows hiss past, some loosed from his own parapets, others rising from the enemy ranks, and the air is alive with the wasp buzz of fletching and the meaty thuds of shafts finding flesh. A boy barely old enough to shave fumbles with his bow 3 paces away, fingers slippery with sweat, and Aldrich sees the lad's eyes fixed not on the enemy, but on the flag with the red and gold hound, confusion and dread plain on his soot-streaked face. Aldrich almost snaps at him to focus on the target, to forget what he sees, to do his duty, but the words catch. He cannot bring himself to repeat the same hollow commands he has lived by, not when each heartbeat drives home the truth that someone down there has taken his symbol and turned it into a weapon pointed back at him. A fresh volley from below clatters against the stone. One arrow carves a line across Aldrich's cheek where his helmet does not cover, hot pain flaring and then settling into a warm trickle that he tastes when it reaches the corner of his mouth. He wipes it away with the back of his glove more from habit than vanity, smearing grit and blood together, and squints through the haze to study the formation around the stolen standard. Whoever leads that knot of men knows what he is doing. They move with purpose, shields overlapping, spears angled to catch any rash sortie, their advance measured but relentless. These are not mercenaries hired from some distant war, nor bored younger sons of nobility seeking glory. Their armor is mismatched, some pieces rusty and dented, their boots are patched, their faces darkened as much by years in the fields as by the smoke of this day. The realization slides into place with the same slow, grinding inevitability as a falling portcullis. These are villagers, tenants, men whose names once crossed his ears in reports about harvests and tax collections, men whose petitions he ignored because they interrupted a meal or a weapons drill. Aldrich's breath catches as he recognizes one of them, a broad-shouldered man with a crooked nose that had been broken years ago in the castle stocks for speaking too loudly against an unfair tithe. Another, taller and gaunt, had come to the gates with 3 starving children at his side, begging for leniency after a bad harvest, and had left under blows and orders that Aldrich himself had delivered in the Lord's name. Faces once blurred into a mass of the peasantry now rise from the crowd with horrible clarity, each attached to a memory of a signature he put on a decree or a squad of men he led to restore order in some distant hamlet. They climbed the hill not with the tight discipline of professional troops, but with a kind of cold, desperate fury, shouting words he cannot make out over the din, yet he does not need to hear them to know the meaning. This is not a foreign army. It is the return of every choice he made to bow his head and say, "Yes, my lord," when a part of him wanted to refuse. He forces himself to step back from the parapet, boots scraping on the slick stone, lungs burning as if the air had turned to ash, because if he keeps staring at that banner any longer, he fears he might simply stay frozen until an arrow finds his throat. His men glance at him as he passes, seeking reassurance in the set of his jaw and the steadiness of his stride, unaware that inside his armor his thoughts are unraveling faster than the mortar between the stones above the last impact. The courtyard feels even tighter when he descends the stairs, the press of bodies and the noise multiplied at ground level. The quarreling of crows on the distant outer walls is the only sound that has not changed since that long ago peaceful morning. Honor is obedience without question, he hears his own voice say again in his head, the echo of a younger man who had not yet seen how easily that phrase could be twisted into a leash. With his own sigil now staring back at him from the enemy lines like an accusation, the question he has never allowed himself to form finally forces its way through the fog of habit and smoke. Who took his banner, and how many sins has it been used to justify while he looked the other way?
The next impact hits before Aldrich reaches the foot of the stairs, a deep, grinding concussion that runs through the stone like a shudder and nearly throws him against the wall. Somewhere above, on the section of battlement he has just abandoned, the trebuchet stone finds its mark with a sound like thunder slammed into rock, and a heartbeat later, dust and fragments cascade down the stairwell in a choking shower. He hears, muffled but unmistakable, the short, high scream of a man who has no time to understand he is falling, and then the heavy, final crash of a body meeting the courtyard cobbles. The stairwell fills with the sour tang of powdered mortar and the sharper scent of fresh blood drifting down with the dust, and for a moment the air feels thick enough to chew. Aldrich grits his teeth, shoulders forward and pushes through, boots slipping once on a layer of grit as he forces his way into the chaos below, his lungs protesting as they drag in air polluted by smoke, fear, and the reek of the latrines that overflowed hours ago when no one had time to tend them. He barely has time to orient himself before a boy in a dirt-smeared tabard almost collides with him, skidding to a halt with a choked gasp. The lad's hair is plastered to his forehead with sweat, eyes wide and a face streaked with soot and tracks of tears that have dried into pale lines on his cheeks. His chest heaves as he tries to speak, words tumbling over each other until he swallows hard and manages to force them out. The Lord demands his presence in the great hall, now. The urgency in the boy's voice is underscored by the barely controlled tremor running through his limbs, and Aldrich can smell the acrid animal scent of pure panic clinging to him as strongly as the smoke. He nods once, a curt jerk of the head, and strides across the courtyard, weaving between barrels, overturned carts used as cover, and the bodies of a few unfortunates who had died too quickly to be dragged aside. The sounds here are different from the walls. Fewer battle cries, more raw sobbing, the clatter of pots and buckets, the low drone of prayers spoken under the breath, as if the castle itself were caught between a scream and a whisper. The great hall, when he pushes the doors open, feels smaller than it ever has, the high rafters creaking under the strain of tension and the occasional distant impact. Smoke from hastily lit braziers mingles with the lingering smell of roasted meat and spilled ale from meals that ended too abruptly when the siege began, creating a cloying, greasy fog that sits low over the gathered men. At the far end, on his plain wooden chair raised half a step above the floor, Lord Ulrich looks less like the pillar of Valgren and more like a man who has eaten too much of his own surplus. His fine tunic strains over his belly, heavy silver chains coil around his neck like tame snakes, and his face is flushed an unhealthy mix of anger and fear, beads of sweat glistening at his temple despite the chill that creeps in through the cracked shutters. Around him, a cluster of younger knights stand rigid in polished armor that has seen more tournaments than real war, hands resting on sword hilts, mouths full of fierce, empty promises about holding the enemy until the last man.
One of them, barely older than Aldrich's first squires had been, slaps a mailed fist against his chest and vows loudly to make the bastards choke on their own blood. And the others nod, their eyes bright with the fire of men who still believe pain is something that happens to other people. In a shadowed corner, a thin priest in a stained surplice mutters his Latin so fast the words blur into a nervous buzz, fingers flying over his rosary as if he hopes to wear down the beads before the walls give way. His lips move around familiar phrases, but there is no weight behind them, only the reflex of a man who has said the same prayers at every funeral, every baptism, every harvest blessing. Now, with the same castle that gave him bread under threat of being torn apart, his voice shakes just enough to betray that habit has finally met something it cannot fully soften. A clerk crouches on a low stool near Lord Ulrich's elbow, scratching frantically with a quill over a sheet of parchment that already sags under heavy blotches of ink. He is noting orders, promises, names of messengers, half-formed commands about reserves and supply stores, as if the careful lines and seals could hold the walls together better than mortar. "Aldrich," Ulrich barks the moment he sees the knight, his tone sharp, more out of desperation than authority. His small eyes, reddened at the edges, pin him with a look that demands immediate obedience, as it always has. "We cannot let that insolent banner mock us on our own hill." He spits the word insolent as if it personally offended him more than the dead on his walls. "You will gather men and ride out, break that standard, break the scum holding it, show every coward watching from the fields what happens to those who raise their hands against Valgren." The word he uses for the enemy is rabble, later plebe, tossed out with casual contempt that grates against Aldrich's ears in a way that it has never quite done before. There is something about the ease with which Ulrich dismisses the mass of men outside as if they were less than animals, that the knight's jaw clench beneath his beard. For years he has listened to this man and his father's father speak of the people beyond the walls as if they were part of the soil, useful when fertile, troublesome when dry. But today, with the image of worn faces and patched armor still fresh in his mind, the old habit of accepting that tone wavers. "My lord," he says, voice measured but edged, "that banner bears my sigil. Someone out there had cause and means to copy it. If we knew who—" "I did not ask for questions," Ulrich snaps, his cheeks mottling darker, fingers digging into the armrests of his chair until his knuckles pale. "I asked for action. You have always been good at that, Aldrich. Do what you do best. Obey. Ride out, kill who needs killing, tear that cloth down and bring it back to me, or burn it where they can all see." The hall goes quiet for a moment after that outburst, the only sounds the priest's muttered prayer and the scratch of the quill. The younger knights watch Aldrich, some with faint smirks, enjoying the rare sight of the seasoned veteran being scolded like a recruit, others with something like unease, as if they sense that the ground under their world has shifted a little. Aldrich holds Ulrich's days for a heartbeat longer than etiquette allows, tasting the bitter knowledge that the man on the chair has never once set foot on the wall under a storm of arrows, never once ridden at the front of a charge, yet speaks of killing and banners as if they were game pieces on a board. Then the old reflex sinks its hooks in. He inclines his head in a stiff nod, turns on his heel, and stalks back toward the courtyard, the weight of command settling on his shoulders like an extra layer of mail. The moment he steps outside again, the noise hits him harder, as if the fixed stone walls of the hall had been muffling more than just sound. The sky seems even lower now, the smoke from burning outbuildings and pitch-soaked barricades rising to meet the heavy clouds, filling the space above the castle with a greasy, swirling ceiling that blocks out the sun. The air stings his eyes and bites at the back of his throat, and he can smell not only the familiar stink of battle, blood, sweat, iron, but also the sweet, sickly note of something larger burning, perhaps a barn or the thatched roofs of the outer houses. Men hurry past him, some carrying bundles of arrows, others hauling wounded comrades whose faces are pale beneath streaks of grime, leaving wet trails of red that the constant foot traffic smears into a generalized, sticky sheen over the stones. Some way to his left, a horse screams, a high, desperate sound that cuts through even the shouted orders and then is silenced abrupt as a thought. Back on the wall, the picture is clearer now that he knows what to look for. The enemy lines are not the uniform blocks of a foreign army, but a patchwork of men who have dragged whatever they could to war. Some wear old gambesons patched and repatched, others bits of mismatched mail or a single plate strapped over leather, helms that don't fit quite right or no helms at all. Their shields bear no common crest, only crude markings, bits of painted symbols, or the stained wood of repurposed planks. Yet despite the uneven gear, they move with a disturbing unity, especially around that familiar flag. Aldrich's eyes track across the slope and pick out more familiar shapes. A man swinging an axe who once split logs in the castle yard. A hunched figure limping forward behind a shield who had brought tribute of cheese and complained about wolves taking his goats. A woman with her hair tied back under a dented helmet, loading a crossbow with methodical fury, whose son Aldrich remembers seeing punished in the stocks. His chest heaves as he tries to speak, words tumbling over each other until he swallows hard and manages to force them out. That Ulrich demands that he's ride out and break that standard. He barely has time to orient himself before a boy in a dirt-smeared tabard almost collides with him, skidding to a halt with a choked gasp. The lad's hair is plastered to his forehead with sweat, eyes wide and a face streaked with soot and tracks of tears that have dried into pale lines on his cheeks. His chest heaves as he tries to speak, words tumbling over each other until he swallows hard and manages to force them out. That Ulrich demands that he ride out and break that standard. They rode out not with the thunder of a glorious charge, but with the grim, clattering determination of men who knew they were being thrown into a grinder. The postern gate groaned open just enough for a knot of riders to slip through, shields tight, knees pressed hard against terrified horses that smelled the blood-laced wind and tossed their heads in protest. Aldrich took the lead because that was what he had always done, visor down, jaw locked, the weight of his mail and plate familiar but somehow heavier today, as if every rivet carried an extra ounce of doubt. The moment they cleared the shadow of the wall, the world expanded into screaming noise and savage light. Arrows hissed past like angry insects, a few shattering against raised shields, one burying itself in the shoulder of the man at Aldrich's right and spinning him half out of the saddle with a strangled grunt. Mud sucked at hooves, splashing filthy water and blood up their legs, the ground uneven with ruts, corpses, and discarded weapons. Aldrich shouted for them to keep tight, to push for the hillock where the stolen banners snapped defiantly, but his voice was only another harsh sound in the storm. The enemy did not break at the sight of armored horsemen bearing down on them as so many poorly armed rebels had done in past campaigns. They shifted. A line of shields bristling with spear points swung to meet the oncoming riders, boots digging into the churned earth, mouths set in grim lines. Aldrich had a brief, disorienting flash of memory, teaching green soldiers to plant their feet, to lock their shields, to trust the man beside them, and then impact washed everything else away. His horse crashed against the wall of wood and iron, the jolt shooting up through his spine, spear points scraping and skidding across his greaves, one glancing off his thigh with enough force to numb the muscle beneath. Behind him, one of his men screamed as a spear found a gap in armor and jerked him sideways, his foot catching in the stirrup so that he was dragged for a few heartbeats before another blow ended it. The horse's hot breath blasted against Aldrich's knees, the animal screaming in fury and fear as it lashed out with its hooves, smashing into a shield, sending its bearer sprawling back into his comrades. For a moment, the world compressed into a tight knot of bodies pressed so close that Aldrich could smell the enemy's breath, a sour mixture of onions, stale ale, and sheer terror as they shoved against his horse's flanks. A spear jabbed up at his chest, sliding along his breastplate with an ugly screech, deflected more by luck and angle than skill. He swung his sword down in a brutal arc, the blade biting into a raised forearm, the shock of bone and gristle jolting his arm, and the man went down, screaming, the spear tumbling from nerveless fingers. The line wavered, but did not collapse. More men surged into the gap, some slipping in the mud, others clambering over their fallen without hesitation. Arrows from the walls arced overhead, some clattering harmlessly off shields, others thudding into the press of bodies. Friendly or enemy, it was impossible to tell from here. One shaft struck Aldrich's horse in the neck, and the animal reared, shrieking, hot blood spraying across his leg and spots of red dotting his visor. The world tilted, and for a split second he thought he would be thrown, but he hauled on the reins with the stubborn strength of long habit, forcing the dying beast back down into a staggering, stumbling forward motion. Then, like a curtain pulled aside, the front rank of rebels peeled back a few steps, not with panic, but with a deliberate, practiced motion that opened a narrow corridor directly ahead of him. The sudden absence of resistance nearly unseated him. His horse lurched into the space, hooves splashing through something wetter and stickier than simple mud, and Aldrich instinctively hauled back, slowing before he plunged too far into whatever trap they had prepared. Shouts rose around him, from his own men and the enemy both, a harsh, overlapping cacophony, broken by gasps as everyone processed what was happening. The corridor led straight toward a figure standing a few paces behind the front line, hands steady on a flagpole driven deep into the muck. The banner above it, red and gold, the hound rampant, snapped once in the wind as if in greeting. The man holding it was not the grizzled mercenary captain Aldrich had half expected to see, nor some gaudy petty noble wearing stolen colors. He was plainly dressed in battered leather and a mail shirt that might once have belonged to one of the castle guards, his shoulders broad under the weight of it. His hair was dark and sweat-soaked, plastered to his forehead, his beard short and uneven as if trimmed with a knife in the dark. A pale scar cut through his left eyebrow, tugging the skin slightly and lending a permanent severity to his gaze. That gaze was fixed on Aldrich with a focus that ran deeper than battlefield hostility. There was recognition there, and something like long-nursed hatred, but not the frantic fury of the mob. It was colder, more precise, as if this moment had been imagined many times before the first stone ever flew at Valgren's walls. Aldrich pulled his horse to a full stop, the animal snorting and shaking its head, flanks heaving. Around him, his remaining riders formed a ragged cluster, weapons still raised but unsure, while the rebels held their semicircle, spears ready, yet for the moment still. The sudden lull was bizarrely loud. He could hear the crackle of distant fires, the groan of the trebuchet resetting, the moans of wounded men lying somewhere just out of sight. Between him and the banner-bearer, the churned earth glistened dark, reflecting slivers of gray sky and shallow pools that stank of blood and trampled grass. "You ride out under that sigil as if you still own it," the man with the flag said, his voice carrying clearly over the short distance, without needing to be shouted. It was rough, the accent of the fields, but steady. "You must be Sir Aldrich." The name spoken in that tone hit Aldrich harder than any stone. He had heard it in the mouths of lords, priests, fellow knights, shouted in victory or barked in orders, but never like this, never weighted with personal grievance like a hammer. "You know me," he replied, not as a boast, but a grim acknowledgement, his own voice sounding oddly distant from inside the helmet. "Then you know you stand against Valgren, and there is only one way that ends." The other man's mouth twitched in something that was not quite a smile. "Valgren?" he repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it sour. "I stand against the men who wore that hound while they tore us out of our homes. Your men, Sir Aldrich, your colors, your name on their lips when they shattered doors and lit roofs above sleeping children." A murmur in the rebel ranks at his words, a ripple of agreement and remembered pain that Aldrich felt like claws dragging across his skin. He shifted in the saddle, armor creaking, and for the first time truly looked at the banner-bearer's face, searching it as he would the lines of a map. There was something about the set of his jaw, the shape of his eyes under the shadow of the scarred brow, that tugged at a half-buried memory. A younger woman's laugh, the smell of bread fresh from an oven, the feel of rough linen under his fingers instead of steel, the way her hair had escaped from its binding after he'd tugged her closer in the dimness of a peasant's cottage. He had locked that memory away so thoroughly that it almost hurt to drag it back up now, here in the mud and filth and stink of imminent death. "Who are you?" The question slipped out harsher than he intended, because some part of him already feared the answer. Edrin planted the butt of the flag deeper into the ground, freeing one hand to gesture toward himself, a small, deliberate movement. "My name is Edrin," he said, and the name was a blade sliding between Aldrich's ribs, cold and merciless. "Son of Myra. She baked bread for the castle kitchens until the harvest failed and your lord raised the tithe instead of lowering it. She shared her bed with a knight who promised her more than a handful of coins and a quick goodbye. When her belly swelled, he left. Your master told her there was no place for her shame inside these walls." The sounds of the battle seemed to recede for an instant, leaving only the rasp of his own breathing in his own ears. Myra. He had spoken that name only once aloud after leaving her, years ago, when he had gone to Ulrich with the clumsy panic of a young man who realized his pleasures had consequences, and the Lord had smiled thinly and assured him it would be taken care of, that such entanglements were normal and easily resolved. "Myra is dead," Aldrich found himself saying, the old lie coming automatically to his lips, the one Ulrich had told him to soothe his conscience. "Myra died," Edrin cut in, voice roughening, "but not a fever in a warm bed as was whispered in your halls. She died on the road, driven out in winter with the rest of us when your men came under that hound, saying there was no bread for useless mouths. I held her hand while she choked on her own lungs in a ditch, Sir Aldrich, and there was no priest, no clean cloth, no grave but a shallow hole under frozen earth. The child she carried did not die. He grew up hearing your name." Aldrich swallowed, the inside of his mouth suddenly as dry as old parchment, though the air outside was a moist slurry of mist and breath. The pieces fit together with brutal clarity. The timing, the age of the man before him, 30 perhaps, just enough years to have been conceived in that brief, reckless season when he had allowed himself to believe he could be both knight and man, duty and desire. He remembered Ulrich's firm hand on his shoulder, the paternal tone as he said it was better this way, that Myra and the child would be cared for elsewhere, that Aldrich must think of his future, of lands and titles, and the spotless reputation a lord needed in his retainers. He had chosen to believe it because the alternative was too ugly to face, and because honor is obedience without question was easier than honor is responsibility for what your obedience creates. Edrin took a step closer.
The illusion that this was a parley shattered the instant an arrow hissed in from somewhere off to Aldrich's right and punched through the throat of one of his riders, spraying a hot arc of blood across the side of his horse's neck. The man made a wet, surprised sound, hands clawing at the shaft, then toppled sideways out of the saddle into the muck, his body convulsing once before going still. That single, ugly death snapped every taut nerve on the field. Shouts erupted on both sides, some men raising shields, others lifting weapons, and the fragile space between the two lines trembled on the edge of collapsing into raw slaughter. Edrin did not flinch, did not step back. He simply lifted his free hand, palm open, and yelled something over his shoulder that Aldrich could not catch over the renewed clatter of steel, but the effect was instant. The nearest rebels held their ground instead of surging forward, spears dipping just enough to be ready without closing the remaining gap. It was an act of control Aldrich had seen only in drilled troops, and it told him that whatever else Edrin was, he was no mere peasant carried along by rage. "We are done talking out here," the younger man called, eyes never leaving Aldrich's visor. "You want to know how your name was used? You want to see how deep your lord's lies go? Then go back to your stone nest and ask him. We'll be waiting when you've heard enough." The words were both invitation and threat. Another stone from the trebuchet screamed overhead toward the walls, trailing dust, and exploded somewhere behind Aldrich with a crack that made the horses dance and rear. Instinct pulled him back. His surviving riders tightened around him, shields angling automatically toward the source of the most immediate danger. For a heartbeat, he considered forcing the confrontation here, now, driving his few men straight at Edrin, trying to cut down the banner and the bastard in one savage push, but the thought died even as it formed. They were too few, too exposed, and the rebels were dug in, their spears drinking horseblood already. Any such charge would end in splintered lances and dead mounts, and even if by some miracle he reached Edrin, what then?
Slaying the man in front of his followers would not kill the resentment in their eyes, nor answer the questions now gnawing at the rotted beams of Aldrich's certainty. He jerked his reins, signaling retreat, and the knot of knights began the unpleasant work of wheeling their mounts around in the sucking mud under a rain of angry shouts and a few opportunistic missiles. A spear flew and stuck in the trampled ground a hand's breadth from his horse's hoof. A stone bounced off his shield with a dull thud. The rebels did not press hard, Idrin's order, he suspected, but they harried them enough to ensure there was no dignity in the withdrawal, only the clumsy, grinding effort of men dragging themselves out of a fight they had not truly entered. As they pounded back toward the postern gate, the familiar silhouette of Valgren loomed larger, its walls pitted and cracked, flags tattered, the stone itself seeming to sag under the cumulative weight of every impact. Smoke coiled out of arrow slits, and the gatehouse timbers looked scorched, hastily reinforced with extra beams and chains. Inside the castle, the air felt even thicker, the tension a living thing crawling across exposed skin. Aldrich threw himself out of the saddle with more force than grace, landing heavily, his knees complaining as he straightened. His men scattered to tend to the wounded and the mounts, their faces pale and drawn under streaks of filth. No one cheered his return. There was no triumph to celebrate, only the grim relief of knowing their commander was not yet another corpse to be stepped around. He shoved his way through the courtyard, past a line of women wringing bloody rags into a trough that had once held clean water for washing armor, past a child sitting on a barrel with a bandage wrapped clumsily around his head, eyes glassy as he stared at nothing. Every sight scraped at his already raw nerves. With each stride toward the great hall, the weight in his chest grew. Anger at Idrin's accusations, at Ulrich's easy contempt, at himself for the decades of unquestioning compliance that had led them all here. He did not wait to be announced this time. The doors of the hall flew inward under the impact of his shoulder, slamming against the stone with a boom that silenced conversation and prayer alike. The same greasy, smoke-laden air greeted him, but the scene had shifted. Some of the younger knights who had smirked earlier now looked shaken, a few sporting fresh bandages, one with his arm held in a makeshift sling. The clerk's parchment pile had grown, a forest of orders and counter-orders, blotches of ink spreading like infections across the page. Lord Ulrich turned on his chair, frown already forming, his mouth opening to demand a report, but Aldrich spoke first, his voice low and rough, cutting through the mutters like a blade. "Mara did not die of fever," he said, the name landing in the hall like an unwelcome guest. "You told me she did. You stood in this room and said the child was gone, that it was all taken care of." For the first time that day, Ulrich blinked in something like real surprise, his grip relaxing on the armrests. The priest stopped his mumbling mid-phrase, staring, and even the scratching of the quill faltered. A dozen pairs of eyes swung from their lord to the grizzled knight, sensing something dangerous unfolding that had nothing to do with the stones pounding at their walls. Ulrich recovered quickly, lips thinning. "Is this truly the moment for peasant whores and old follies, Aldrich?" he demanded, anger sharpening his words. "We have an army at our gates. You were sent to scatter them and bring down that stolen flag, not to gossip about some kitchen wench from 20 years past." The dismissive tone, the sneer wrapped around the word wench, lit a spark of fury in Aldrich that had been smoldering since the first stone hit the walls. He took a step closer to the dais, armor clinking, eyes never leaving Aldrich's visor. "His son stands out there now," he said, each syllable deliberate. "He bears my name as a curse and my banner as a weapon. He told me how your men, under my colors, drove them out in winter, how she died in a ditch while you told me she had been taken care of." A murmur ran through the hall at that, an uneasy rustle like the shifting of grain in a half-empty silo. The priest made a sign of the cross on himself, more from habit than conviction. Ulrich's cheeks flushed a deeper red, a vein pulsing at his temple. "I did what I had to do to keep this house clean," he snapped. "You came to me, panicked about your mistake, and I ensured it would not stain your record. You were too valuable a sword to be dulled by a bastard in some muddy hut. They were compensated, sent away with enough to start over elsewhere. If they failed, that is hardly my concern. A lord cannot cradle every cottager who trips over his own feet." "Compensated?" Aldrich repeated, the word tasting foul. Idrin's voice echoed in his skull. "No priest, no clean cloth, no grave."
And the decrees? He rounded at the clerk, who flinched, clutching his quill like a weapon. The orders of confiscation, the punishments, the winter tithes you raised when the crops failed. He showed me parchments bearing my sigil authorizing every cruelty. When did I sign those? The question was aimed at Ulrich, but his gaze bored at the clerk, and under that scrutiny the younger man's composure cracked. He fumbled where a stack of parchments rolled, hands shaking, before producing a few and holding them out as if to ward off a blow.
"My lord dictated them," the clerk blurted, eyes flicking between Ulrich and Aldrich. He said they should carry your seal, Sir Aldrich, to give them weight among the stewards and reeves. I pressed it myself as ordered. You were away on campaign when most were issued." The admission hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Aldrich's hand went reflexively to the crest on his breastplate, fingers tracing the familiar lines of the hound, and for the first time it felt less like an honor and more like a brand burned into his skin. Dozens of documents had gone out with his name, his mark, while he swung his sword in distant fields, believing himself a protector of this land. Ulrich's mouth twisted into something between annoyance and contempt. "You knew the duties of your station," he said. "You benefited from the rents those orders secured. Do not pretend innocence now because some starving plowman decided to gather his fellows and play at war. This is the way of things, Aldrich. Men like you and me give orders. Men like them obey or are removed. You have always understood that. Why else would you have repeated that little phrase of yours to every boy they sent you? Honor is obedience without question, was it not?" He mimicked the words with a cruel lilt, and a few of the younger knights shifted uncomfortably, hearing their own education thrown back at them like a jest. The phrase coming from Ulrich's lips made Aldrich physically sick. It was one thing to hold to a harsh creed when he believed it served some greater balance, that the suffering it demanded had purpose. It was something else entirely to see it used as a convenient shield by a man who had never risked more than his pride in any conflict. He stepped right up to the bottom of the dais now, close enough to smell the mix of wine and fear on Ulrich's breath. "They are not playing at war," he said, a dangerous calm settling over his words. "They have starved under orders you signed with my name. They have buried children by the roads your tax riders traveled. The son you exiled in my stead has dragged my banner through the mud and raised it against us, and looking at what you have done with it, I cannot say he is wrong to do so." Silence rolled across the hall in the wake of that statement, more complete than any gap between impacts. One of the younger knights, the one with his arm in a sling, stared at Aldrich with something like fear and admiration mixed, as if watching a man walk across a beam over an abyss. The priest licked his lips, glanced at the crucifix on the far wall as if seeking guidance from a figure of wood that would not answer. Aldrich's eyes went flat, some last veneer of genial lordship peeling away to reveal the hard, small man beneath. "You forget your place," he said, each word clipped. "You are my vassal. Your oath binds you to me, not to the whims of dirt-eaters outside these walls. Whatever rough handling they have suffered was necessary to keep Valgren strong. Without men like us, this hill would be a bandits' camp instead of a castle. And yet, it is a band of those dirt-eaters who hold us here now, with my own hound at their head." He straightened, the movement somehow making his battered frame seem taller. "You used my name as a mask, my sigil as a cudgel, and called it politics. You lied about my era, about the child, because it was easier to throw them into the cold than to see one of your knights live with his consequences. I have obeyed you for a lifetime, Aldrich. I have killed and bled and watched men die believing we were defending something worth their sacrifice. Tell me now, looking me in the eye, that any of this was worth it." For a heartbeat, there was a faint flicker in Ulrich's expression, annoyance giving way to something like impatience, as if arguing morality while the stones fell was an indulgence he could not afford.
Worth it? He scoffed. We sit behind walls while they stand in the mud. I eat from silver while they gnaw on roots. Of course it was worth it. That is the order of the world, and you are too old to start pretending otherwise. He waved a dismissive hand as though brushing away a fly. Enough of this. The enemy gathers for another assault, and instead of readying the men, you stand here whining like a penitent. You will go back to the walls, Sir Aldrich. You will hold them as you always have. That is what I expect from my hound. The word, twisted to match the crest between them, landed like a slap. Aldrich realized then that in Aldrich's mind he had never been more than that, a weapon that barked and bit where pointed, its loyalty assumed, its thoughts irrelevant. Something in him that had bent and bent over the years finally snapped. The hall seemed to tilt back into place, the sounds outside rushing in again, another distant crash, the muffled cries of the wounded, the low, anxious hum of people bracing for the next blow. Outside, rebels were indeed forming again, preparing to throw themselves against stone and steel. Inside, on this dais, sat the man who had set them all on a collision course and felt no remorse. Aldrich stepped back one pace, enough to see not just Ulrich, but the faces of everyone watching. The knights who learned honor is obedience at his lips, the clerk whose ink had stained more than parchment, the priest whose prayers had blessed banners that now flew on both sides of the field. The enemy is not only at our gates, he said, the bitter truth settling over him with icy clarity. He has been sitting here for years, calling himself Lord. No one moved at the words. No one tried to stop him as he turned away from the dais. But as he strode back towards the doors, he knew that whatever lay beyond the walls of Valgren, the real siege, the one against his own illusions, had already been lost. And whatever choices he made next would not be to defend Ulrich's house, but to answer for everything that had been done in his own name.
Dawn slid over Valgren, not as a gentle light, but as a sickly thinning of the darkness, a gray smear that did nothing to soften the black pillars of smoke clawing up from burned outbuildings and shattered roofs. The air had turned colder in the night, but the chill did not cut through the heat radiating from the fires or the hot metal tang that seemed to cling permanently to the back of Aldrich's throat. He stood once more on the northern wall, helmet off for the moment, sweat steaming off his cropped hair despite the early hour, watching the enemy lines tighten like a noose. The trebuchet's arm creaked, then slammed forward, and the stone it hurled smashed into the already cracked curtain with a grinding roar that made the floor quiver under his boots. Mortar dust puffed up around him, fine as flour and sharp as ground glass in his lungs. Someone coughed wetly nearby, then spat red onto the stones. The breach that had been a worry yesterday was now a wound, jagged and gaping, its edges sagging outward over a slope of rubble that led straight down into a kill zone that would soon belong to someone else. He did not waste breath shouting curses at the machines. Anger at inanimate wood and rope would not shift the battle one finger's width. Instead, he moved along the parapet, barking orders, dragging half-dead men back into line with the flat of his sword, shoving archers toward the narrowest angles that still had a clear field of fire. His body acted out of long habit, turning, pointing, steadying, while his mind held a cold new calculus. Which positions could be held long enough to slow the flood, which must be abandoned before they turned into traps, where to bleed and where to cut off the limb. Below, the northern wall finally surrendered to the constant battering. With a sound like a mountain sighing, a whole section of stone folded outward and dropped, sending up a thick plume of dust and debris that momentarily hid everything. When the curtain of grit settled, the view had changed forever. Instead of an unbroken rampart, there was now a jagged slope of broken stone leading from the field straight into the heart of Valgren. The rebels saw it too. A hoarse roar rose from their ranks, not the neatly timed shout of drilled soldiers, but a raw, rolling sound full of hatred, hope, fear, and hunger. horns brayed, crude but effective, and the mass of men that had been pressing at the gates pivoted toward the new path, boots churning up the frosted grass as they pounded uphill. Aldrich caught sight of the red and gold hound bouncing above them, Edrin's banner leading the way, the cloth snapping in the dawn wind like something alive. He clapped his helmet back on, the world narrowing to the slit of his visor and the thunder of his own heartbeat drumming in his ears. "To the breach!" he shouted, voice cracking with overuse but still carrying. "Pikes forward, shields in front. If they want this castle, make them drown in their own dead to take it." What followed was not battle so much as butchery. The breach became a funnel, drawing men into a confined, hellish space where the stones underfoot shifted treacherously, and every step forward was over someone else's leg or guts. Aldrich planted himself just behind the front rank of infantry, sword in hand, shield on his left arm, the old familiar weight turned into an extension of his will. Spears jabbed down from the rubble, punching into throats, faces, gaps in armor. The rebels pulled their fallen back with desperate hands and shoved more bodies forward to fill the gaps, their own spears poking up in reply. The clash of metal on metal, the dull thumps of wood on bone, the tearing sounds of steel through flesh merged into a single grinding noise that never quite ceased. The air was a thick stew of breath, screams, and smoke. The ground under Aldrich's feet became a slick, treacherous paste that threatened to send even experienced fighters spilling if they lost focus for a heartbeat. He lost track of time completely. There was only the next man lunging at him over the rubble, the next blow to deflect, the next order to shout over his shoulder. His arms burned, every muscle in his shoulders and back screaming protest, but his body remembered what to do, even as his thoughts drifted, unbidden, to every farm he had ever ridden past without truly seeing, every face he had forgotten a moment after collecting the rent. Somewhere to his right, a man he had known since boyhood went down with a steer through his eye, hands clawing at empty air before he tumbled backward into the tide of bodies. To his left, a gap opened in the line as a couple of terrified conscripts tried to scramble away from a particularly fierce push, and Aldrich slammed into it, shield first, bellowing at them to stand fast, while his own sword found a neck and opened it in a hot spray that painted the inside of his visor. It could not last. For every rebel that fell in the breach, two more clawed their way over the pile of shattered stone and meat. Arrows from the inner walls began to slacken as quivers emptied and bowstrings snapped. Somewhere behind, a fire took hold in the lower levels of the north tower, the smoke drifting low across the yard, stinging eyes already red from fatigue. A messenger stumbled up the slope of debris, panting, one arm hanging uselessly at his side. "They're inside the east postern," he gasped, spitting blood. "Gate burned. They're in the lower wards." The news spread among the defenders like a cold draft through a crowded room. However hard they fought here, the enemy was pouring in elsewhere, seeping into the castle's guts through every crack and unbarred door. Aldrich made his decision with the speed of a man who has gambled with lives for decades. "Fall back," he roared, grabbing the nearest banner-bearer and yanking him toward the inner yard. "We hold the keep. Pull back in order, damn you, or we die for nothing." Reluctance and relief warred on the faces turned toward him, but long habit and fear of his wrath did what love of Aldrich never could have done. The line bent, then pulled away in ragged stages, covering one another as they gave up the breach and spilled back toward the central courtyard. The rebels surged into the space they vacated, some collapsing on their knees in exhaustion the instant they reached the top of the rubble, others charging on, drunk on the proximity of their goal. The courtyard, once the heart of Valgren's daily life, was now a slaughter yard. Makeshift barricades of carts and furniture had been thrown together overnight, already splintered under the impact of men and missiles. Fires licked from windows on one side, oily black smoke pouring out and crawling along the underside of the ramparts. Wounded men lay where they had fallen, some dragging themselves with their hands to get out of the path of the fighting, others too far gone to move, their moans turning to weak gurgles as boots and hooves passed near.
Aldrich drove what remained of his force toward the heavy doors of the great hall, the castle's last defensible heart. "Inside," he bellowed, "form on me!" He was not thinking of protecting Aldrich. He was thinking of narrowing the battlefront to a space where the numbers might count for less, where walls and choke points could still be used to mitigate the flood. When he forced the doors of the hall open with his shoulder, the contrast made him want to retch. The same smoke hung in the air, but here it tangled with the smells of spilled wine, cold meat, and tallow candles, the trappings of comfort clinging obscenely to a room about to be drenched in blood. Aldrich stood in the center of the floor now, not on his dais, flanked by a knot of knights and a couple of household guards, his face sheened with sweat, one hand gripping a sword he clearly did not know how to use properly. Behind him, chests of silver and tapestries had been dragged together in a crude barrier, as if coins and cloth could stop spears. His eyes lit with something like frantic hope when he saw Aldrich. "You held them?" he demanded. "Tell me we still have the walls." "We have minutes," Aldrich replied, not bothering to soften the truth. "They are in the outer wards and through the north breach. This hall will be the last thing to fall." Aldrich's mouth worked, some protest or order dying on his lips when the first crash shook the doors behind Aldrich, as something heavy, perhaps a battering ram, perhaps just a log wielded by many hands, slammed into the wood. Dust drifted down from the rafters. The priest in the corner began to gabble prayers again, louder now, his beads clacking frantically. Several of the younger knights looked to Aldrich, not to their lord, for instruction. It was in that moment, with the oak planks at his back shivering under blows, and the man he had served his entire adult life standing in front of him wrapped in gold and fear, that Aldrich understood there was only one meaningful choice left for him. He could fight and die here as Aldrich's hound, buying the Lord a few more panicked breaths, or he could use the only currency he had left, his reputation, his proximity, to do one honest thing before the end. The knowledge settled on him with a strange, clear calm. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them in 3 strides. "They are not here for Valgren's stones," he said, pitching his voice so that only those nearest would catch his words over the hammering on the doors. "They are here for you." Aldrich blinked, confusion flickering. "Then you will keep them from me," he said, as if the conclusion were obvious. "You swore to—" The rest of the sentence never left his mouth. Aldrich moved faster than any man his age had a right to, driven by hard-trained reflex and the sharp edge of decision. His left hand shot out, grabbing Aldrich's wrist, twisting it down and inward. The Lord yelped in surprise, grip loosening. At the same instant, Aldrich's right hand brought his own blade up, not in a killing blow, but in a precise punishing strike against the inside of Aldrich's elbow. The impact.
For a few heartbeats, chaos filled the hall with such density that it was hard to tell one sound from another. Voices rose, steel scraped, someone screamed, someone laughed too loudly for the moment, and in the middle of it, Ulrich stumbled like a man pushed into deep water, arms out, eyes rolling from face to face as if trying to find the old order and slot himself back into it. The words he threw at the rebels were the same ones he had always used: gold, titles, safe passage. But stripped of stone walls and distance, they sounded thin, almost absurd, drifting over men whose hands were cracked from years of harvest and hunger. When the first spear shaft thudded into his chest, not hard enough to kill, but enough to topple him to his knees, the sound he made was small, high, and frightened, the sound of someone who had finally understood that no one was standing between him and the reckoning he had built. Ulrich did not move to help him. He watched from a few paces away, sword lowered, feeling the moment stretch and distend, every breath in his lungs measured. The blows that followed were not clean executions. They were messy, overlapping, boots to ribs, fists, a knife from someone in the second rank who darted in, slashed, and then disappeared again into the crowd. Ulrich did not stop them, did not egg them on either. He watched with a face cut out of stone, jaw set, eyes flat, as the man who had signed away his childhood disappeared beneath the weight of hands that had carried stones, plows, and coffins. When it was over, Ulrich was recognizably human only by the shape of his clothing. The hall, which had so often echoed with his commands, held a moment of heavy quiet.
the kind of silence that follows a storm when everyone listens for the next thunder and hears only the drip of water and the creak of broken branches. The fight that remained inside Valgrind did not last long after that. Word spread faster than fire through dry reeds. The Lord was dead, the hall taken. Some of the remaining guards threw down their weapons the moment rebels appeared in the doorways. A few tried to carve their way out and died in cramped corridors where their fine blades caught on rough stone. No one came riding in shining armor to reverse the tide. Ulrich helped disarm men he had trained, stripped them of swords with hands that had once guided those same blades, and sent them stumbling out into the courtyard where the rebels were gathering prisoners, wounded and loot in untidy clumps. He moved automatically, directing, answering, pushing bodies where they needed to be, but there was a strange lightness under the habitual heaviness, as if some internal weight he had carried so long he no longer noticed it had shifted, not removed, but set in a different place where it tugged at other parts of him. When the hall finally emptied enough that he could hear his own footsteps, he found Edrin near the hearth, standing over Ulrich's broken form. Someone had thrown a cloak over the worsted it, a half-hearted gesture of decency or simply a way to stop people from tripping. The fire had gone down to embers that threw a dull, uneven glow across the younger man's face, softening none of its lines. Up close, Ulrich could see the exhaustion there, the gray smudges under his eyes, the dried blood flaking along his jaw that was not his own. Edrin's hands were steady on the sword hilt, but there was a stiffness to his shoulders that spoke of more than strain. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the distance between them filled with thick air and the faint crackle of dying flames. "You brought him to us," Edrin said finally, without looking up, the words delivered in a tone that gave nothing away. It was not praise, not condemnation, just a fact set down between them like another body on the floor. Ulrich studied the profile that could almost have been his own at that age, if not for the scar and the hard years carved into it. He thought of all the things he might say, explanations, apologies, arguments about intention and ignorance, but each one shrank under its own thinness before it reached his tongue. In the end, he only nodded once. "I belonged to you long before this morning," he replied, voice rough. "I only stopped standing in the way." Edrin's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. "You stood in the way for a long time, even when you were not there." There was no heat in it, just tired observation. He finally turned to face Ulrich fully, eyes searching his father's face with an intensity that was easier to bear in battle than here, in the uneasy quiet after. For a heartbeat, something flickered there. Curiosity, maybe, or the ghost of some imagined conversation between a boy and the man he had dreamed his father to be, but it went as quickly as it came, leaving only the guarded distance of two soldiers gauging one another. "The men are outside," Edrin continued. "They're looking for someone to tell them what comes next. They think victory answers everything. It does not. They will want grain, roofs, a promise that this is not only a different hand on the same whip. They will come to you," Ulrich said. The words cost him less than he would have expected. He could picture the courtyard as it had been at dawn, filled with smoke and movement. Now it would be the same, but with colors shifted, positions reversed. The faces would not change much. Men were men whichever side of the walls they stood on, but the eyes would look to a different center. You led them here. They followed your banner. That is what men remember. He paused, feeling the raw edge of another sentence pressing against his teeth. You will listen to you for a while. Ulrich's gaze did not soften, but he looked suddenly older, as if a day had passed in the time it took to exchange those few lines. For a while, he echoed. Until the first bad harvest, the first hard decision they do not like. Then they will say someone else has betrayed them. Maybe they will be right. He sheathed his sword with a practiced motion and stepped past Ulrich, heading towards the doors. In that brief passing, he smelled of sweat, iron, and smoke, the same as every other fighter here, no better, no worse. The brush of his shoulder was not deliberate, but it carried a weight Ulrich felt long after the younger man had gone. Outside, the courtyard looked like the aftermath of a storm that had torn up roofs and left debris in every corner. Bodies lay under rough shrouds or not at all, the dead of both sides indistinguishable beneath drying blood and dust. Someone had dragged Ulrich's banner down from the highest tower. It lay crumpled near the well, half trampled, the bright colors dulled by grime.
A couple of rebels were already arguing over a chest of plate armor stripped from a fallen knight, while a woman with a bandage tied around her head picked her way through the mess, searching faces until she found one that made her stop and sink to her knees. A small group of former garrison guards stood together near a wall, unarmed, eyes hollow as they watched their world rearrange itself without their consent. No one was giving orders yet. That absence made the space feel even more precarious, as if everything might tilt into new violence with one wrong word. Ulrich moved towards the base of the tower almost without thinking, drawn by the sight of his banner hanging there like an accusation. The climb up the narrow, spiraling stairs left his legs aching and his lungs burning, the smells of old stone, smoke, and old rushes mingling in the enclosed space. At the parapet, the wind hit him hard, cold and sharp, carrying away some of the thickness from his chest. From up here, the hill unrolled in a series of scars, blackened fields, trampled hedgerows, the faint lines of cart tracks leading off to hamlets that he could now name in his mind because Edrin had spoken of them, each with its own story. The rebel camp lay like a ragged cloak around the base of Valgren, tents flapping, cook fires smoking, the small figures below moving in patterns that would soon solidify into routines of a new normal. When he reached the batter rope with fingers that trembled more from age and fatigue than emotion and worked the knot loose, the fabric sagged, then slid down the pole until he could catch it, the familiar weight of it settling over his arm. Up close, the hound was a blur of faded dye and grime, the gold thread frayed, a few slashes where blades had caught it. He remembered the day it had first been raised, bright and crisp, the sun catching on the stitching, his own heart pounding with a young man's unscarred pride. That memory felt as distant as childhood stories now, belonging to someone who never had to stand across a field with his own colors and wonder what they were worth. He folded the cloth slowly, not in ceremonial precision, but with the careful movements of someone who knew this might be the last time he touched it. When he came back down into the courtyard, Edrin was already there, surrounded by a loose ring of men and women. Their voices quieted when they saw Ulrich with the bundled cloth in his hands. A few bristled, misunderstanding, hands going to their weapons, but Edrin lifted a hand and they stilled. Ulrich stopped a few paces short of them, feeling every eye on him. "This belongs to you now," he said, holding the folded cloth out, "or to no one, you decide." For a second, he thought Edrin would refuse, that he would see it as poison or mockery. Instead, the younger man stepped forward and took it, the fabric heavy between them. He did not raise it, he did not throw it in the mud, he simply held it, looking down at the frayed edges as if reading something there that no one else could see. "It was never only yours," he said quietly, almost to himself. "We bled under it long before today." He turned and handed the bundle to one of the men behind him, a farmer Ulrich dimly recognized from some winter levy. "Put it away," Edrin told him. "We'll decide later what to do with it." The man nodded, tucking the cloth under his arm with the same care Ulrich had used on the tower, and disappeared into the press. There was no grand declaration that followed, no anointing, no sudden unity. Instead, the practical questions began to surface, jagged and insistent. Who would guard the stores, how to divide what food remained, where to put the wounded so they would not rot in the open, what to do with the prisoners from the garrison. Voices rose, argued, overlapped. Some looked to Edrin, some to older men who had once been village reeves or elders. A few even glanced at Ulrich out of habit before catching themselves. The structure of the day shifted grain by grain, power sliding into the spaces left empty by Ulrich's broken body and the fallen walls. Ulrich watched it for a while, then slipped away to a quieter corner of the yard where a section of wall had collapsed inward, leaving a sheltered angle of stone and shadow. He sank down there with a groan, armor scraping, the cold seeping through the gaps where padding had worn thin. His hands rested on his knees, streaked with old and new blood, knuckles swollen.